Hello and welcome to Journal. I'm Steve Kendall. For children who have suffered from abuse or neglect, they're the most vulnerable people in our society. And one of the ways a group deals with this to provide support for children who find themselves in that situation is a group called Northwest Ohio CASA. And we're fortunate today to have one of the representatives from that group here, Desiree Eeisenman of Northwest Ohio CASA, which stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. So Desiree, welcome to the Journal. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for those folks who don't know a lot about what Northwest Ohio CASA is, could you talk a little bit about the background of the organization and just generally what it does, and then we can talk in more detail about some of those other parts.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Steve said, CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. So our organization recruits and trains community volunteers to advocate in court for children who have experienced abuse or neglect. So we have volunteers who get to know these children and the people in their lives well enough to share what they believe is in the best interest of the child.
Now, in terms of geography, what areas would we be talking about for your particular group?
Yeah, so CASA is a national organization, so you'll find it across the nation. Our particular organization, Northwest Ohio CASA, serves Henry County, Defiance County, Williams County, and Paulding counties.
Okay. So, yeah, now, and you talked a little bit about the fact, and I know that in the intro I talked a little bit about the main purpose. When people are involved in this program, for instance, if I'm a volunteer, I'm one of the folks who's being an advocate working with the children in this situation, what kind of things do I have to know, or what's the process for me to become a volunteer and get involved in the organization?
Yeah, one of our most frequent questions is, do I have to have a background, like a legal background? Do I have to know anything about the legal system? And you do not. So to become a volunteer, we will ask for you to fill out a pretty extensive application. We also do a one-on-one interview. We do a background check, and then if you make it to that point, we feel like an individual would be a good fit for our organization. We will have them join our pre-service training, which is a 30-hour training. We're currently doing those all virtually, but that will provide the future volunteer with all of the information necessary that they need to know in order to work these cases. And they'll do court observation, and then, you know, our staff is just there to support them throughout the entirety of the cases. Yeah,
so there are resources then, so it isn't as if, as you said, you don't have to have a degree in anything specific to this particular area. And there are resources then available, so if a question comes up, you've got someone as a volunteer, you can tap that resource and find, okay, I'm in this situation, what should I do? And hopefully your training carries a lot of that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
When it comes to the timing, like, so if today I said, you know, I'd like to sign up, get me into the training program, is that something you can do? Is there a window for those, like certain times of the year, so many times a year you start the training program?
We typically kind of determine trainings based upon the need that we have in our counties, and then also the interest that we have. So if we receive a lot of applications at once, we will decide to do a training coming soon. So we are planning on most likely having a training at the beginning of 2022. So probably starting in January will be our next training.
Yeah, and you mentioned the number of, depending on the number of potential circumstances you have. What typically, for instance, like right now, what would be to call it anything better, the caseload for CASA volunteers? How many children are you working with right now?
So we are currently serving in the 4-county area. We are currently serving about 130 children.
Wow, wow. So
and we have about 60 volunteers.
Yeah. Now, and I know that no case is similar to another one. The volunteers, once they're involved in this and they've been assigned or they're linked up with a child in this situation, what is their responsibility? What are the things then you expect them to do, and how much time does it take? And I know that each case probably it's a variable, how much time maybe they're involved in, but typically what would it be like if I'm a volunteer and I'm in the program? What's required of me at that point in terms of time and effort, I guess?
You know, we say it's somewhere in the range of maybe 5 to 15 hours a month, depending on where we're at in the case. So at the beginning of a case, it's going to be a little bit more time. A little bit more time will be required because you need to get to know everyone involved, and there will be a little bit more frequent court hearing. So our volunteers are required to meet with the child or children. Sometimes there's multiple children on a case. They're required to meet with these children at least once a month at minimum. So that's our main requirement. We are there for the children. But additionally, they're also required to, at some point, speak with parents, foster parents, teachers, doctors, therapists, anyone involved in the child's life to try to paint a picture of what's really going on and provide their concerns, provide their recommendations to the judge on what may be in the best interest of this child.
Now, and you've touched in some detail on this, if I'm a volunteer, what would be the circumstance? What would be, and I know there's nothing typical about each case, as I've said before, what would be the things I would be dealing with as a volunteer? So you mentioned going into court and watching those procedures, that sort of thing, being involved in those. What would be some of the things I would be confronted with as a volunteer when I'm now working with one of these children?
Like you said, each and every one of our cases are so different, but one of the pretty consistent things, unfortunately, that we see is drug use in the parents. So that is one thing that a lot of our cases will involve. Typically, by the time our CASAs are appointed to cases, the parents are already starting to work towards reunifying with their children. So we don't typically, we're not like the caseworkers that go into the really, really bad situations. We're not removing the children from their homes. By the time we are involved, they are in a safe environment. Whether or not it's still with their parents or with a foster family or with maybe a relative. So at that point, we're going in and we're kind of making sure that they're still safe throughout the duration of the case. But like I said, at that point, typically the parents are doing everything that they can to try to reunify with their children. But, we do see some pretty scary things sometimes. We do have to observe parents' homes or go into potential homes for the children. And sometimes they aren't what we believe are the best living circumstances. But we teach our volunteers, about working through some of those implicit biases and working through some of those feelings that may come up, and knowing that maybe the way we grew up or the way that we lived isn't necessarily how everyone lives.
Okay. Well, we come back, we can talk a little bit more about that, because I think our viewers would be interested in hearing more about that process. And well, first of all, and we can talk about how children are brought to into this process, and then how your folks are able to interact. Back in just a moment with Desiree Eisenman from Northwest Ohio CASA here on The Journal. Thank you for staying with us here on The Journal. Our guest is Desiree Eeisenman from Northwest Ohio CASA. And for those of you who don't know what CASA stands for, it's Court-Appointed Special Advocates. They work particularly with children who have been experienced neglect or abuse in their living setting. And Desiree, talk a little bit about how these children come into a program that then your group provides support for and becomes involved in. Where do these children come from? What are the circumstances? How do they come to the attention of an authority or some other group?
Yeah, so that's one of the most frequent questions that we get. When our phones ring, it's typically a family member or even a parent that says, my child or my grandchild needs a CASA volunteer. Unfortunately, we cannot take referrals from anyone except from the judge.
Right. Okay.
So our volunteers are appointed directly from the judge. And these are open abuse, neglect, or dependency cases. So they must be involved in the child welfare system. This is an open case, and our referrals must come directly from the judge.
So the resource people involved in the court say this would be a good possibility to become part of the CASA program. This is where we need someone to get involved. At that point, then, the case has been referred to you. What's the next step that you folks take? And you review the case, obviously, but what does that entail before you actually assign it to a volunteer?
Yeah, so we look at the details that we are provided with about the case, the age of the child, maybe the circumstance, what got them involved in this case. And we try to link them up to a volunteer that we think would be a really good fit. So some of our volunteers will have been doing this for a really long time, and they know that maybe they prefer to work with young children, or some of them prefer to work with older children. So we try to link them up with the volunteer that we think they will be able to really bond with. Yeah,
and that makes sense.
Oh, sorry.
No, go
and then
ahead.
Immediately what they do is start working that case. So that from the minute that they receive the information and they receive their appointment from the judge, they will call the caseworker, they will get in touch with the family, they will try to schedule their first meeting with the child. And it just kind of from there, it just goes pretty quickly.
Yeah, and you anticipated my question, because I was thinking that, certain volunteers would feel more comfortable. This is what they're good at. This is what I'm not good at. This is how I feel more comfortable with. And that probably comes out when you're doing the recruiting process, the training process, and all of that, to say, where do you feel most comfortable? Well, I'd like to deal with children on the younger end of the scale versus whatever. So yeah, that's good to know. Now, you talk about the number of volunteers. Typically, how long do volunteers work in the program? Do you have people that have been doing it obviously for years and years, but you're always looking for new people, obviously, additional people?
Yes, we are definitely always looking for new people. We just celebrated one of our volunteers who has been a volunteer for 20 years, which is pretty impressive. Yes. Yeah. So we have lots of volunteers who have been there for 5+ years. We do see some turnover. It's pretty hard work, whether it's they get into it and it's a little bit too rough, or life changes happen. Maybe they move, or they have children of their own, or health concerns. So we do see some turnover because of those reasons as well. But we have a lot of volunteers who have been doing this for a significant amount of time.
Yeah, and it sounds like too that in terms of demographics, the age range and all of that is pretty broad. It isn't all just people who may be retired or whatever. It's across the spectrum of the population that's out there that wants to do this.
Absolutely, we have volunteers of every age, every walk of life, whether we have retired, school teachers or retired individuals. We have young professionals, we have stay-at-home moms, we have couples that work together on a team. So we see really, I think our youngest volunteer is 22, and I think that goes up to beyond 70. So. Wow.
Well, and the good thing about that is it's that broad range of life experience that they bring to the program and to the children involved. When you look at this, do you get sometimes in terms of volunteers, does word of mouth work for you, where people who've been in the program say have a friend or a relative or something, you might be interested in doing this? Do you get some of that where the people that are involved recruit other people for you possibly?
Yeah, one of the questions that is on the application, among lots of other questions, but one of them is, how did you hear about the program? And more times than not, it's typically through another CASA volunteer or through a friend who, heard about the program because they know a CASA volunteer. So that is definitely our biggest recruitment tool is our current volunteers. But we believe that that's a really wonderful thing, because if they are recruiting other volunteers, then you know that it is a very meaningful volunteer experience.
Yeah, speaks to the success of the program, that they believe in enough to talk to somebody else. In terms of the ages of the children, what are we talking? Everything from newborn to what would be the oldest child you might be working with?
Newborn to 18.
Okay.
On a very rare occasion, they could be up to 21. Depending on the circumstances, they could still be considered a juvenile child up to the age of 21, but typically we see that cut off at 18. So 0 to 18 typically. Yeah.
And if you looked at and I know that it's going to change on a regular basis, are you typically seeing younger children versus the older children, or I'm sure it just depends on what's happening at that particular point in time, but I'm sure you unfortunately see children, really young children, in difficult situations.
Yeah, and I can't really say that we see one age group more than the other, but we have, even at this particular moment in time, we have several newborns and we have several teenagers and everything in between. We just see really a little bit of everything.
Okay. Well, when we come back, I know that one of the things we haven't touched on yet, you have a lot of events that people can get involved in, and of course a lot of ways for people to support the program besides becoming volunteers. So when we come back, we can talk about some of those events and ways people can get involved besides being a volunteer with Northwest Ohio CASA. Back in just a moment with Desiree Eisenman here on The Journal. Thank you for staying with us on The Journal. We're talking with Desiree Eisenman. She's a representative of Northwest Ohio CASA, court-appointed special advocates. And we've talked about the program and how people can get involved to a certain extent. But the other thing you do is you hold events also to promote what CASA does and get people involved, and also to garner support, because obviously resources are needed for this. So I know just recently you had your 5K earlier this month. Talk a little about how that went and how those events typically go for you.
Yeah, so Northwest Ohio CASA is a nonprofit organization. So in addition to the really important work that we're doing, recruiting and training volunteers and supporting them, we also really need to do fundraising events as well, so that we are able to continue recruiting and training those volunteers. So like Steve said, we just had our 5K at the beginning of the month. We actually partnered with another nonprofit called the Children's Lantern in Defiance, and they provide resources for foster care, individuals in foster care and their families. So we serve a lot of the same children and families, and so we decided that we would make a great team. We came together and it was a really, really fun event. It was an evening 5K, so we had lanterns and glow sticks, and we had that at the reservoir in Defiance. It was a superhero theme, and we had a free obstacle course for children that was really, really fun. So we're hoping to bring that back next year, because we had such a great time, and we're able to spread the word about both of our organizations.
Yeah, and I know the next event, because I was looking at your calendar, is something called, which obviously we're in the Halloween season, so it's called Witches Brew. So talk a little bit about what that particular event is like, and how people can know about that and enjoy that as well.
Yeah, so this is probably our favorite event of the year, but we have two Witches Brews. We have one that's actually going to be, so this is airing on Thursday. It will be today.
Oh, okay.
It's happening on Thursday, which is the Defiance Witches Brew for CASA. And we partner with the Defiance Visitors Bureau to do the Witches Brew in Defiance. And then the Symphony of Trees in Henry County also has has a witch's brew that will take place on October 23rd, downtown Napoleon. So we have two opportunities to dress up like witches and support the downtown businesses and ultimately support Northwest Ohio CASA for the Defiance event. And then for the Napoleon event, it benefits three organizations, one of them being Northwest Ohio CASA. The other two, it's the Center for Child and Family Advocacy and the Henry County Hospital.
Wow, so yeah, a lot of folks are going to benefit from that then as well. You mentioned Northwest Ohio CASA does what's called the Symphony of Trees, which is a wonderful title. What is the Symphony of Trees?
Yeah, so the Symphony of Trees is actually its own separate nonprofit. They were created in 2000, the year 2000, after recognizing that there was a need for the children in our area. So they came together, and they're made up of a wonderful group of board members and committee chairs, dozens of individuals who are caring and giving individuals. And additionally, they request donations from so many different people, hundreds of donors. And because of that reason, they are able to have this week-long series of events, which I can talk about briefly. And ultimately, that money that they raise benefits our organization as well as those other two organizations that I mentioned earlier. Yeah.
So what are some of the parts of this? You mentioned that there is a sequence of events or a sequence of activities that take place as part of this. What are some of those?
Yeah, so we have tons of really fun events with the Symphony of Trees. So it begins, other than the Witch's Brew, which will be on October 23rd, the main events will begin on November 11th. So the evening of November 11th, there is a business after hours. These all take place at the Armory in Napoleon. On November 12th in the evening, there will be a German Fest. So kind of like a fun, casual event. You know, you can dress up and just come have fun. There's dinner and drinks and dancing. And then the morning of November 13th, there is a tapestry of tables where lots of women host a table. They decorate them beautifully, dress up, and have a really nice lunch. And then the evening of that same day, November 13th, is the Symphony of Trees gala. So dinner, dancing, lots of auctions and things like that to try to raise money for our organizations. And then the final event is that Sunday, which is a children's party. So I believe this year it is a carnival theme. They invite children. It's a really, really fun event.
Wow, yeah, sounds like a lot of activity and a lot of effort goes into it for a really good series of causes. If people wish to donate in other ways or support the program in other ways, what are some of the ways they can do that for Northwest Ohio CASA?
Yeah, so we always say, you know, if you are unable to become a CASA volunteer, because we know that it's a pretty extensive volunteer role, it's not for everyone. But if you want to still support our organization or give back, you know, just come to our events, come to our fundraising events. Just by doing that, you're ultimately supporting our organization. And regarding the Symphony of Trees, you're also supporting the Center for Child and Family Advocacy and the Henry County Hospital. Additionally, being a nonprofit and also the Symphony of Trees being a nonprofit, we never say no to donations either. So the Symphony of Trees is looking for not only monetary donations, but also like items to auction off at the event. So whether those are big items or little items that they can put together in a basket, they're always looking for things like that, because ultimately those donations are what are auctioned off and how our organizations really will be able to receive those proceeds.
Now, if someone wants to participate in that, wants to donate, wants to become involved in that way, what's the simplest way for them to find more information or get in touch with representatives from Northwest Ohio CASA and Symphony of Trees?
Yeah, so if you have more questions about Northwest Ohio CASA specifically, you can visit our website, which is northwestohiocasa.com. And then also we have an email, which is just info@nwocasa.com. If you have more interest about the Symphony of Trees, if you would like to donate or attend any of our events, purchase tickets for any of the events, you will visit symphonyoftrees.com. Additionally, we both also have Facebook pages, Twitter pages, and Instagram pages that we typically will share all of the most up-to-date information there.
Yeah, so no one should have any trouble finding you in any format. That's good to know. Well, Desiree Eisenman, thank you so much for coming on, talking about Northwest Ohio CASA and all of the other events and things you're involved in. Great program, and thank you to those people that volunteer, and of course the folks at Northwest Ohio CASA as well, all the resource people as well. Great service. You can check us out at WBGU.org, and of course you can watch us every Thursday at 8 p.m. on WBGU PBS. We'll see you again next time. Good night and good luck.